To receive testimony from General Darren McDew on the current state of the U.S. Transportation Command. In the contested environment described within the new National Defense Strategy, Transcom's capacity to mobilize and deploy forces across the globe becomes ever more crucial to our ability to project power. The National Defense Strategy provides clear focus on the great power competition with China and Russia. We've been talking a lot about that recently. The National Defense Strategy emphasizes the importance of resilient and agile logistics. The assumptions that U.S. forces will have uncontested access to airspace and sea lanes is becoming less and less likely. General McDew, you appeared before this committee at a time when these responsibilities are of vital importance to the nation's security. Our adversaries are not standing still, they're moving fast, and we are very distressed at some of the things that we see on a first-hand basis. Transcom's job is to ensure that our operational plans contain valid assumptions for how our soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen will get to the fight and how they will be sustained in a contested forward environment. Efforts are currently underway to conduct an overarching mobility study that would articulate how Transcom would operate in a contested environment, as well as execute its joint distribution and deployment responsibilities. Our current approach relies on moving material to large air and seaports, which serve as efficient hubs, but are also well known to our adversaries and would be very hard to defend against a precision weapon attack. The department must begin to focus on the improving resilience. Anything less would be significantly increase the risk of our missions. And so we thank you for appearing today and look forward to your frank discussion on the Transcom's potential problems and successes. Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me join you in welcoming General McDew to the committee this morning and to testify on the plans and programs of the United States Transportation Command, or Transcom. As we continue to review our fiscal year 2019 authorization request, we are grateful to you for your service and the service of the men and women in Transcom. Please thank them for us and their families who also serve with great distinction. The men and women of Transcom perform duties that sustain the whole Department of Defense effort in protecting our nation's security. With a competitive edge in its ability to deploy and sustain America's armed forces, Transcom provides DoD with unique capabilities that we have come to expect and perhaps too frequently take for granted. Transcom forces are busy supporting all of the combatant commanders every day, and without these Transcom forces, the United States would be at a significant disadvantage almost everywhere in the world. Transcom faces a number of daunting tasks, including a unique set of cyber threats, because you must work extensively with private sector entities in the transportation and shipping industries to support DoD deployment operations. 3 years ago, the committee issued a report on certain aspects of Transcom's cybersecurity situation, and General McDew, I would like to get an update from you on the progress in the cybersecurity efforts that you have made since last year. The Ready Reserve Force, the RRF, a group of cargo ships held in readiness by the Maritime Administration, is aging and will need to be modernized over the next decade. Last year, the committee authorized the Department to start a program to recapitalize the Ready Reserve Force by authorizing DoD to purchase up to 2 foreign-built vessels while the Navy moves forward on a plan to design a family of auxiliary vessels for a number of uses, including recapitalizing the Ready Reserve Force. This authorization to purchase 2 vessels was intended to cover recapitalization requirements for the first several years of the Future Defense Program. However, this year, the Administration is asking to increase that authorization to include purchasing up to 24 foreign-built vessels. General McDew, I'm interested in your perspective on this request, whether such a large increase is needed, and if there are any alternative options. In addition to the Ready Reserve Force, the Defense Department also needs to ensure that the Civil Reserve Air Fleet, or the CRAF, the CRAF program, which provides as much as 40% of wartime airlift needs, remains viable after operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and will be able, as needed, to surge capacity in the future. General, I'm interested in your views on the state of the fleet and if anything needs to be done to ensure their readiness. Our global transportation capability, owned and managed by Transcom, has been one of our asymmetric advantages for many years now. However, we cannot assume that potential adversaries will allow us free rein in this area in the future. General McDew, I understand that you have been conducting analysis to assess requirements for an environment where our mobility forces would be challenged. I also understand that the Department will share those results later this year. Perhaps you could give us an update on when we are likely to see the results of your analysis. Thank you again for your decades of service, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Joe McDew. We'd like to hear your opening statement. Your written statement will be made a part of the record. Thank you for being here. You're recognized.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the committee. It is an honor to be with you this morning, and thank you for your leadership and unwavering support you give the men and women who serve our great and mighty nation. I also want to thank you for the opportunity to represent the United States Transportation Command and the work of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen, civil servants and contractors, and their families. The men and women who make up this command underwrite the Joint Forces lethality with unparalleled capability, and I'm exceptionally proud of what they do. As a matter of fact, we're probably the only command that has a watch party for this event. So they're all watching back home in the cornfields of Illinois right now. U.S. Transcom's Total Force team works every day to provide our nation with a broad range of strategic capabilities and options, but they don't do it alone. I wish every American citizen could understand how much we rely on the nation's truck drivers, conductors, commercial pilots, mariners, stevedores, and much, much more to meet national defense requirements. U.S. Transcom is a global warfighting command with functional expertise, and we move and sustain the joint force, but we're also responsible for operating the expansive Joint Deployment and Distribution Enterprise. I can say with full confidence that today, U.S. Transcom stands ready to deliver on behalf of national objectives, anywhere, at any time. However, I do remain concerned about the future. As we refocus our efforts on great power competition, we are faced with potential challenges to our democratic values, our security. In this environment, we must always be ready. As we increase lethality across the joint force, the resources necessary to transport and sustain America's military must keep pace. Our ability to project a decisive force is foundational to the national defense strategy. The size and lethality of the force is of little consequence if we can't get it where it needs to go when it needs to get there. To that end, the 2018 National Defense Authorization Act directed a mobility capabilities and requirements study. This study will determine if, in fact, the current inventory of mobility assets is sufficient to support national security requirements. The study will consider the impact of multi-domain contested environments as well as the implications for attrition. The outcomes of this study will provide valuable insight to ensure we continue to meet today's needs while simultaneously evolving for tomorrow. But U.S. Transcom can't get there alone. We must have the weight of the entire nation behind us to ensure that when our diplomats go to the negotiating table, they do so from a position of strength. One of the greatest threats to that strength is malicious activities in the cyber domain. Our adversaries no longer have to stop us with bombs and bullets. All they have to do is slow us down with ones and zeros. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the challenge of our time. We must grow in this domain as a nation so that we can protect ourselves and protect each other. We also face challenges in the physical domain. The current ratio of active duty to reserve component forces means we must rely on the reserves and National Guard to fulfill wartime requirements. For 3 decades, our reserve component has been used to sustain day-to-day operational requirements, a function for which they were not properly resourced or structured. Meeting the challenges of the future may require adjustments to mobilization authorities or force mix to assure access to vital capacity. While U.S. Transcom operates the most robust patient movement system in the world, we lack sufficient capacity to surge for large-scale conflict. The combination of a number of factors decreases the likelihood that we'll see the same high survival rates we've seen in the more recent conflicts. We continue to work with the services, the Joint Staff, and the National Health Enterprise to address these challenges. Finally, if we are to maintain our nation's power projection capabilities, we must first acknowledge our waning sea lift capacity. The U.S. flag fleet has steadily declined since World War II from 1,288 ships in 1951 to 81 U.S. flagged ships operating in international trade today. The degradation of the fleet also means fewer qualified merchant mariners, the simple backbone of our maritime industry. With the decline in our maritime capacity, it's becoming increasingly difficult to characterize America as a maritime nation. In response to an aging organic sealift fleet, the FY18 Defense Authorization Act authorized the purchase of 2 used vessels. We thank you for supporting this first step. Thank you again for inviting me to speak to you today. Please say hello to all the folks in the cornfields of Illinois who are watching you today. And we thank you very much for allowing me to speak on behalf of U.S. Transcom and I believe America's heroes. And those are the civilians, contractors, and service members who project and sustain power around the globe every single day. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and you'll be happy to know that all of your corn guys are right down here to my right. I have 2 things I wanted to...
Corn in Indiana there, sir.
Oh, that's right, that's right. But
Well, there's corn in Mississippi, too.
Hey, there's even corn in New Hampshire.
We're okay with all of
yeah,
it.
you got it. Yeah. It's great to eat, but not good in your gas tank. Now, the... You really started something, didn't you, gentlemen? Let me. You have said some things that I sure look at, and I try to do the math and figure out how this is going to work as we get our aging fleet going. You made the statement: America's air fueling fleet is the most stressed of our air mobility forces. Now, the KC-135 is 61 years old. They've quit making the C-5 and the C-17, and we're looking at the KC-46. That's great, and it's going to be well maintained in Tinker, and I'm very happy that that's going to come. However, they've ordered 179 of them. I'd like to have you kind of explain how this is going to work. You're going to see a phasing out. At the same time, it's going to take 10 years, apparently, to get to the 179. And then we have our KC-135, which will be at that time almost over 70 years old. So I really have 2 questions on this. Do you think that the KC-46 will be delivered this year as projected? And the impact on the current operations in maintaining the existing air fueling because of the production delays of the KC-46? And do you believe the current inventory of C-17s and C-5s are sufficient to provide the necessary gap that we're looking at? How is the math going to work on that down the road?
Well, Senator, that's a very insightful set of questions, and I will try to give as concise a set of answers as I can. Believing whether or not the KC-46 will be delivered on time, I talked to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force yesterday. He has some concerns about the ability to deliver the airplane as projected, but is committed to having the airplane that is delivered be operationally capable when it is. And I believe all the Boeing and the Air Force are both trying to get to that point. Your discussion about whether or not our fleet is of sufficient size, thank you for having us do another mobility capabilities requirement study, because that will answer that question. All the studies we've had to this point have not included things like a contested environment, cyber, and some other things that we've discovered over the last few years that we really need to put a focus on the mobility forces, because no one before has believed that we're going to lose anything. Okay,
and I appreciate that, and we'll look forward to getting that report. Now, I do want to have time to get an answer to this one. It was just a month ago that Senators Ernst, Round, Sullivan, and myself were in the Pacific area. We were talking to our international partners in South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines, and it kind of solidified my understanding of the expansionist activities of China and what they're doing. People don't realize they're actually creating these islands. There's not any legal justification in my mind for this, but it's being done. and they are actually set up as if they're preparing for World War III. Everything from runways, cannons, it's all 100% military. We've got 7 locations down there, and the 7 outposts add up to over 3,000 acres. So it's a big deal over there. It's got a lot of attention. And then when you stop and realize that where the 7 outposts are in the Spratly Islands, they're located in the international waters between Vietnam and the Philippines. So I'd like to get from you how concerned you are in terms of what this does to our seaways and our capability that you are going to have to be using.
Senator, freedom of navigation and access to global ports is one of the most significant things I deal with on a regular basis, not just for me, but for our partners and allies around the world, anybody that loves freedom and understands how important it is to global economy.
Yeah, well, yeah, but in that particular area, though, it would seem to me that could be very obstructive in our ability to fill the missions that we have on those sea lanes. So apparently you do agree with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Senator Reed.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentleman McDew, you indicated in your comments and in my comments also that cyber is probably the #1 challenge if you look at your responsibilities. Can you elaborate a bit about what you're doing? But also, I'm under the understanding, and correct me if I'm inaccurate, that many of your contractors don't have adequate cyber protection, civilian contractors. In fact, there's even some notion that they're not required to report immediately when they detect breaches. Can you give us kind of an evaluation of not only what you're doing, but the problems you have in your contractor force?
Yes, Senator. So cyber is the #1 threat to U.S. Transportation Command, but I believe this is the #1 threat to the nation. And the nation's problem is there's not a clear national cyber standard. All of our contracts with our contractors includes a cyber standard, a hygiene standard for our contractors. It doubles down on the requirement federally to report intrusions. But a greater problem is that in our headquarters, cyber is commander's business, but not in everywhere across our country is cyber a CEO's business.
So that, how are you doing in terms of compliance? You have teams that will go out and review a major subcontractor for either ships or planes, et cetera, and then require them to make corrections. Can you do that?
We have the authority to go out and do inspections, but that's a relatively new one that we've not exercised yet. Across our Civil Reserve Air Fleet contractors, they get a regular inspection as part of their safety inspection, and we're trying to get that to be a regular part too as cyber.
And do you have the resources to do those types of intensive inspections?
Not at the pace we probably would like to, but we also require that they have someone check on their security as well. The problem is I'm not sure everybody understands how problematic it is.
Right, and I think what you said before is that unless it's a command priority, and in your shop it is, but over in civilian shipping lines and aircraft, it's not so much a command responsibility or a leader responsibility. It's there, but it's not being fully enforced. Is that accurate?
In some are probably leading the nation in their ability to look at this problem set, but in our cyber roundtables, which is one of the things we're doing to raise our level of awareness, some of the CEO's chief security officers can't even get to see the board. They can't even see the CEO, so that's a problem. Thank you.
We're trying to deal with that on the banking committee with requiring someone on the board to be a cyber expert, and we're running into some trouble, but the SEC should do that immediately without waiting for us. Shifting gears, we gave you authority to buy 2 foreign ships as we thought a bridge to a longer-term plan. Now you're coming and asking for 24. The first question that strikes me is, can't our American shipyards produce these ships if they're given the design, and why do we have to go off and acquire so many foreign ships?
Our American shipyards build some of the finest ships in the world, so that's not really a problem. It really comes down to how much money we want to spend and when we want to recapitalize this program. So first, thank you for the authority to buy 2 used ships. You know that I focus on the fact that they're used. Many of these ships were built in foreign yards. However, they're sailing for us today under the U.S. flag, and they've been converted to U.S. flagged, and they're U.S. crewed ships. And what we'd like to be able to do is to get rid of the steam plants that I own. In 2020, I become the largest owner of steam plants in all of the maritime industry across the world. I don't want that title, Senator.
Okay. But we will look carefully at that request. And obviously, last year we were sensitive to your requirements for an immediate quick fix, and we did. Another aspect here, which is, I think, very important, is that in your prepared statement, you point out that the medical evacuation system has some shortcomings that we have to respond to in terms of the ability to move injured personnel quickly to a suitable facility. Can you just quickly, I only have a few seconds to make a comment on that?
The biggest part is that we've transitioned ourselves to thinking that we're no longer going to work in a permissive environment, that every environment will be contested. If that's the case, then it compounds every one of my missions that I've been given. The biggest part as well is that our medical infrastructure in the United States is not the same as it was in, say, whatever, you want to pick the date you are. It started to atrophy. Yeah. And so if we're going to move back hundreds of patients from the theater in a big war, our ability to scale and use American hospitals is not the same as it was, say, 20 years ago.
And you have alternative plans to cope with that situation now?
We're working with the national health agencies to try to come up with those alternative plans, but they're not as easy as you could imagine. If you start to think that we're going to lose more people in a potential big end fight and have to transport more people back, we don't have the military hospitals we once had, and we don't have the civilian hospitals we once had.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Wicker.
Senator McDew, thank you for your service. These 22 ships, General McDew.
Oh, thank you. I could not do your job.
Well, we couldn't do yours. But let me ask you to follow up on this question that Senator Reid asked. Of these 22 ships, you're asking for 22 more, 24 used ships. Where were they manufactured? Or where, I guess you haven't identified them.
All the ships have not been identified yet, but
typically they would have been manufactured other than in the United States.
Most of them.
And would all of these be currently U.S. flagged ships?
The ones we would target would be U.S. flagged ships that are sailing for us, many of them in the Maritime Security Program, that a company might shuttle after 20 years of life. That cuts my fleet's age in half overnight. And there are pennies on the dollar right now in the open market. And
what is their expected life expectancy after you would purchase them? These 2 that you're already in the process of acquiring, and the other 24.
We would probably end up using those ships for another 20 to 30 years. And so you're talking about a ship you can purchase right now from $20 to $30 million on the open market that you'd use for another 20, 30 years, versus buying a new ship, which is the ultimate goal, is to build ships in the U.S. yards that would be built new, but maybe cost $850 million a ship.
Okay.
It'd take a while to recapitalize.
Now, do you support the Jones Act and the Cargo Preference Act as being vital to national security?
I do, Senator, but for a number of different reasons. My primary focus is on national security and the capacity that I need to take this nation to war. It is our asymmetric advantage to deliver a decisive force in the maritime domain. The rheostats I have to affect that balance right now is helped by the Jones Act and cargo preference, because being able to get more mariners to work allows us to have the capacity we need to go to war. If there were other rheostats, and currently there are not, maybe we could use those, but those are the ones I have to use.
Well, what has happened in a year to cause you to go from a request of 2 ships to 24?
The fact that my request was larger last year, I'm happy to get the 2 that I got. We have a requirement to try to recapitalize about 26 steam plants. So 2 is the beginning to try to get to 26. We won't have a brand-new ship built, that I understand, in the Navy's recap plan until about 2030. Between now and then, I'm going to age out some ships.
What is the 25% reduction in U.S. flagships due to our labor pool? And what help do you need from this committee and this Congress in that regard, sir?
The labor pool, we're approximately a couple thousand mariners short of the need that we think we'll have in the early days of a conflict. And that labor pool is the true heroes of our national defense. Those mariners who went to war in World War II and lost at the highest rate of any single population are the ones I believe that will be with us in the next big conflict. An incentive to keep those people going to sea is the kind of help we need.
Well, okay, but part of that is having the ships for them to serve on.
And the cargo for them to put on a ship. And we've got to be able to also decide as a nation, is this country still a maritime nation? I believe it is. However,
I believe it ought to be.
We have a hard time right now finding the evidence in our policies and laws that would be able to convict us.
And one other quick point, just for you to emphasize, I noticed on page 15 and 16, you talk about the nation's infrastructure. And you make the point that an infrastructure program is great for commerce and great for transportation domestically, but it is also very much part of your national security program.
Yeah, a strong U.S. economy, a strong U.S. infrastructure, a strong industrial base, and I'm not talking about the defense industrial base. Those are the people that make our exquisite widgets. I'm talking the industry base in this country that does things for us, and it is the military that we have today that heavily relies upon those and the infrastructure they ride on.
And specifically, you have a concern going forward about our nation's rail system being up to speed in terms of what the military is going to need to transport on rail going forward.
Our rail companies do a very nice job because they actually work on that infrastructure. So it is probably the best shape of our infrastructure. The concerns I have are in the cyber domain when it comes to rail. Cyber defenses, we've got to continually look at it. I would imagine that every one of our potential adversaries understands our vulnerabilities in rail.
Thank you. Thank you. And I apologize for calling you a senator.
I'm actually flattered, but I can't do your job.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, General McDew, thank you very much for your service and for being here today. I want to follow up on some of the cyber issues that have been raised already in your testimony and by others. Have there been any changes to how Transcom writes its contracts with private providers, our commercial partners, to address cyber issues?
Absolutely. I'm quite proud of our acquisition professionals. When we had our cyber contested war game, the first in the history of the command after 30 years of existence, we've since had 2. And when cyber came at the top of that list of things we ought to be considering, we put cyber standards in every one of our contracts. They're not as stringent as we want them to be, but we're trying to work with industry to bring them along. Because if we push them too fast and too hard without the help of Congress and the national standard, I'm not sure they'll stick with us.
And are those standards that have been developed by Transcom? Are they DOD standards? Are they reflected across the federal government? Do you know the answer to that?
The standard is a NIST standard.
Okay.
It's a NIST 800 standard we've adopted.
Great. And is that consistent with what the rest of DOD is doing? Do you know?
I can't say that all of DOD and all of their contracts has that standard in there.
But it's probably something we should strive for.
There should be a standard across the nation in federal government on how we're dealing with cyber.
One of the things you mentioned in your testimony last year was that you believed we need a cyber-related, you called it bridging of the gap between DOD and the rest of the federal government. Have you seen any progress on that, and can you enunciate what that is?
I've not seen as much progress as I would have liked to have seen. However, there has been incremental progress. U.S. Cyber Command and DHS, the two entities
Right.
that are responsible for each side of the gap, are completely coordinating and involved. I sit in the middle of that gap in a lot of areas that we don't focus on. I go back to the defense industrial base. Everybody's focused on the defense industrial base. Not everybody's focused in all of industry. I deal with a lot of mom and pop organizations, single owners, the folks that make our country run. They don't have the help and the cyber technical expertise to do what they need to do.
So when there's a question about who's complying and who isn't, who's in charge of that? One of the concerns I have is that we don't have a singular person or entity who's responsible for cyber throughout the federal government.
So on the civil side, .com, .gov, it would be DHS.
Okay.
On the .mil side, it's U.S. Cyber Command.
And so if there's a difference for some reason around an issue, who resolves that?
I would imagine that it would have to go to a cabinet-level discussion because the Cyber Command commander is a COCOM just like, well, about to become a COCOM just like me.
Right.
So he can't argue with the Department of Homeland Security.
It's my understanding that there have been some issues with the European Deterrence Initiative in movement of personnel and equipment around Europe. Can you describe what those challenges have been and what we need to do to address them?
Well, I believe that U.S. European Command and our NATO allies have done a very nice job of illuminating some things that we have lost track of over the last few decades. When we had 300,000 soldiers on the European continent, we had a better understanding and relationship with the countries, the multiple countries that would be involved, the border crossing issues, and all of those things that you just routinely dealt with because you had a lot of people there. Now we're facing some atrophy in that understanding. We've seen changes in how the Europeans themselves deal with transportation across the continent. So all of that has compiled us to say that we need to put more focus in that area, and UCOM is doing a nice job of that.
So the issue hasn't been so much the transportation capacity, it's been around the coordination of how we move people and equipment?
A little bit of both. So many of the things that used to be government-owned are contracted out in Europe as well as in our country. And so you've got multiple contractors now where it might have been a government-owned entity before at some point. You've got different rail gauges in one side of Europe to another. All of those things are a bit more complicated because we don't have the forces in the theater that actually just make that much smoother.
And how important have our allies been in helping us address some of those issues?
One of the reasons that we're as good as we are is we have some wonderful allies in some wonderful places, and we've got to continue, as the National Security Strategy says, to be by, with, and through our allies and partners, and they've been exceptional.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to thank the chairman for bringing up the importance of corn as a food source and also recognizing the availability of our farmers to produce enough to not only produce food but energy as well. And it does a great thing when it comes to the petroleum produced in your state because when added to petroleum, it actually improves petroleum. So we appreciate the opportunity to bring that up again today, Mr. Chairman. Earlier, General McDew, first of all, thank you for your service. I most certainly appreciated the time that you spent with us in sharing some of the concerns that you've expressed here today publicly. Let me just work through a couple of items that I think I'd like to flesh out just a little bit. We've heard from GAO and others that decisions about transportation infrastructure, such as ports and equipment, have struggled because of the lack of prioritization by the services and the lack of visibility to Transcom and the larger community of transportation professionals where there may be existing issues. To your knowledge, is DOD working to establish some sort of internal capability to expose capability gaps and funding needs for transportation infrastructure?
Senator, DOD is working on and continues to work every year on prioritizing how we spend our money to get the best use of every taxpayer dollar that we get. We've been very blessed to get the amount of money we've gotten, particularly for the next couple of years of a budget cycle. But when the services go and decide that they have to balance, and they balance their budget every year, but when they balance it under constraint and the fact that it's not always delivered on time, that means that a service chief and a service secretary has to make a decision on what priorities get funded. And when they make those, sometimes logistics falls at the end and the bottom of that priority list. I fully understand having to have a kinetic effect, but I'm parochially interested in the fact that our ability to project that power is what makes us the world's last superpower. I think the priorities that are established are about as good as they can get. What I'd like to get is more emphasis on kinetic, also has to have projection.
I think I was fortunate to accompany the chairman on a CODEL earlier this year where we went into the Pacific region, and clearly the distances there are critical. And as we've said, we prefer to, if we have to fight a war, we want to do it away from our shores. We fight away, we don't fight at home. And that means that in order to get there, we've got to have your operation be as successful as possible. It's got to be efficient, and it's got to have the means to not only get people there and get them home safely, but to resupply them while they're there as well. I'm just curious, you've talked about cyber and about the need to continually improve the cybersecurity that we've got right now. There's been a little discussion today about where you believe we're at today. Can you share how serious the cyber threat is to your command? Can you give us some examples in this open setting about how serious the threats are that are out there today?
Senator, I believe it's serious enough for me to challenge one thing you just said, and I try not to challenge the senator in public testimony. But you talked about us fighting away games versus fighting on our home field. I believe in the cyber domain, we're fighting on our home field right now. That's how serious I think it is. I believe every single day, in both the information space and the cyberspace, we are fighting right now, and our contested environment is actually inside the continental United States.
I think that is well taken, and I would agree with you. But I think sometimes we have a tough time publicly being able to discuss how serious that threat is. Assuming that we're actually fighting it right now at home, is this something that happens once in a while? Is this something that happens occasionally? Is this a case of where you're concerned about somebody checking to see whether or not they can get into your plans? Or how deep is the threat, just for the public, how deep is the threat to our ability to actually wage war and keep the kinetic war off of our home borders?
The American public needs to understand how advanced the cyber threat has become. So advanced that an adversary can every day, and I believe that every single day across this country, an adversary or potential adversary is probing us to see how we operate, where our most important data resides, and what triggers they can use to stay short of armed conflict. Nobody right now wants to take on the United States military head-to-head. So why would they?
One last thought, Mr. Chairman, if I could. The point I guess I would make is this just isn't the peer adversaries looking at our military operations. They're looking at the soft underbelly, which is our non-defense but critically important resources that we rely on to move our men and women and our equipment from our shores to any place in the world. It's the civilian side that they're also looking at as well.
Absolutely. I like to point to the fact that we have a national security strategy. Many people believe that it's actually a national DoD strategy. It's the nation that most of our big adversaries and small adversaries will try to attack. I don't think they will actually try to go after, say, a United States Pacific Command or a European command when they could easily get into the United States of America.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator King?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, General, by the power vested in me, I want to bestow upon you the rank of honorary Maine citizen. I know that you started your career, I believe, and not only that, in Aroostook County, which is a particular honor, and I want to acknowledge that and delighted to have you here today. I consider your command one of the most important, if not the most important, in all of the commands that we have, because without you, none of the combatant commands can function. On July 2nd, 1863, the 15th Alabama was charged with coming up Little Round Top and dislodging the 20th Maine. Joshua Chamberlain gets a great deal of the credit, and should, for the leadership that day that he displayed. But a key element in that engagement was that the Alabamans didn't have water. Their canteens were empty. They had marched 20 miles on a very hot day, and the fact that they did not have water and were exhausted was a factor in what happened, which turned American history at that moment. That's just, I think it exemplifies how important what you do is. It doesn't get the headlines or the credit, but what you're doing in supplying both people and material is so critical. Here's one of the things that concerns me. A great deal of your capability is in the private sector. And you are given the responsibility without full authority, because you can't tell Delta Airlines or a shipping line exactly what to do. How do you feel that we're sufficiently wedded, that the contracts are strong enough, that the responsibilities are being met in the private sector that will allow you to meet your obligations in a time of conflict?
First, Senator, I duly accept the honor of being an honorary Maine citizen. My daughter was born in Maine in Aroostook County in lovely downtown Limestone. She has a 007 Social Security number, which I just gave out some PII on her. But that 00 means a lot to us, and we spent 5.5 years and 6 lovely winters in Upper Maine. Logistics, as you said, and the folks that are watching this back in the cornfields of Illinois are quite proud of the fact that we do things for other people, and we take great pride in it. It's like oxygen. When you have it, you don't think about it. When you don't have it, it's all you can think about.
Exactly.
The contracts are not as strong as I'd like them to be. I don't believe that all of our vendors across the country fully understand the threat they're under, nor they have necessarily the capabilities. We are trying to strengthen our contracts through relationships and bringing our commercial partners along with us. I call them my fourth component. I'm just as interested in their readiness and their viability as I am the other military components I have. So we try to bring them along with us and educate them as well.
I hope that you will be very tough on your partners in these situations, because my sense is from dozens of hearings here, both in this committee and others, that the private sector is not fully cognizant of the threat that they're under, and that we don't want to find that out in a time of crisis. The other thing that has changed in your situation is that we've been operating essentially in an uncontested environment for 2 or 3 decades. I understand you did a war game, a contested environment war game recently. Insofar as you can share in this setting what you learned from that, because we're now, the whole national defense strategy is shifting toward peer competitors, and how does this play out in your strategy and capabilities?
Our big revelation, Senator, was that cyber is, in fact, a bigger problem than we had thought before, and then we had to do some things to secure our networks better, which they're pretty secure, but also provide ourselves a level of resilience. The biggest takeaway for me as a warfighting combatant commander is the fact that all of our exercises to this point had assumed no loss of any logistics capability. Like the enemy wouldn't target it.
Right.
And so that we didn't have to think about it. And some of the numbers that we've relied on to say this is the requirement assume no attrition of the force. And attrition is everything from kinetic effects to the lack of maintenance and reliability.
But if we're dealing with a peer competitor who have submarines and underwater drones and aircraft, that's a whole different calculation.
It is, and it's generational. So go back to World War II, and we had that lesson learned.
Right.
We've forgotten it.
And I take it that we're now trying to play catch-up in terms of our capabilities to operate in a contested environment.
Actually trying to catch up on what this new contested environment looks like. Before, we always thought we were in either peace or war, and the gap between the two is about the gap between my hands now.
Right.
We now realize there's a bigger gap in that space. And what is in that space is the difference between being at peace one day and the nation deciding to go to war. The last time we decided to go to war as a nation, and the entire nation was behind it, was 1942 in Romania.
Right.
That space in the middle is not an easy space to live in, and we live in it every day, and it's contested.
Thank you, General. Thank you again for the work that you're doing, and how I know that we are very cognizant of how important it is. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General McDew, for your service, for your hard work here. So the U.S. military is one of the largest consumers of fuel, and Transcom's operations in particular are highly fuel dependent. According to the U.S. Information Administration, the price of crude oil has been on the rise for more than 2 years now. So let me ask, General, what impact does the rising price of fuel have on Transcom's budget?
You know, obviously, amongst the large consumers of fuel, we are the largest, I believe, in the Department of Defense. So every time the price of fuel goes up, that increases the amount of money we must spend to do our operation.
Right, and I take it it's large enough that it has a real impact on your budget. That's what I'm really asking.
It does. I'm also blessed enough to have a budget that's a little different than everybody else's. However, the services budgets are the ones that are more directly impacted.
Okay. So in your prepared testimony, you discussed the current stress on our logistics fleet, both air and sea. DOD's been working for years on efforts to reduce fuel consumption and incorporate alternative fuels. In my home state of Massachusetts, for example, the Army scientists at the Natick Laboratory have been experimenting with new, more energy-efficient shelters and base camps with a goal of reducing fuel demand for the deployed Army by about 25%. Would a 25% reduction in fuel consumption by our deployed forces help mitigate some of the stress on your command and the Defense Logistics Agency?
Yes, Senator, it would.
So that would be a helpful direction. Good. Because, you know, we know that transporting fuel to our forward deployed forces in combat zones is expensive and dangerous, even when we have full control of the skies and the shipping lanes. But as Senator Inhofe said earlier, that's not guaranteed in the future. The new defense strategy says that DOD must be prepared to fight a high-end adversary. That guidance applies not only to the tip of the spear, but also to your ability to supply the logistics chain our deployed service members rely on over time. So let me ask this one, General. Would it be challenging for Transcom and the Defense Logistics Agency to refuel assets and meet deployed energy needs in an environment where we didn't have air or sea supremacy?
Everything gets more challenged when we don't have domain dominance. That's air, land, sea, and cyber and space.
Yeah. You know, thank you. Reducing use of our fuel and exploring renewable alternatives isn't just about the environment. It improves mission effectiveness, and it saves money that we can use to reinvest in the kinds of capabilities that you need. And in a future combat situation like the ones the defense strategy describes, it's going to be an operational necessity. I think we need to get ahead of this now while we can. If we wait until our resupply lines are under threat, it's going to be too late. So I appreciate your good work in this area, General. Thank you.
Senator, if I can just add one
Please.
more thing. The fact that our cyber is such a warfighting domain now, we're under threat right now.
Fair point. So all the more about the urgency of this moment, and we've got to make these changes. Thank you. Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you again, General. Thank you for your work. You mentioned that the cyber threat is one of your major concerns, and that the contested environment is inside the U.S. You also said that our adversaries won't go after PACOM or European Command, but that they would get into the U.S. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by they are going to get inside the U.S.? And what can we do to counter them getting inside the U.S., as you put it?
And I probably misspoke, Senator. An adversary, potential adversary, will always fight head-on with the fighting force. However, what we've been seeing over time is that the information warfare space and the cyber warfare space doesn't have the geographic boundaries that we once thought of.
Yes.
So PACOM geographic boundary or CENTCOM geographic boundary is not as interesting to a cyber or an information warfare officer. So they will go to where they can go. So the United States of America, without a strong cyber standard or without us debating the information warfare space, means that it's a potential target for a potential adversary.
So can you give a concrete example of the kind of vulnerability that we have? I mean, you mentioned that we have a national security strategy, which should include a cyber strategy, but are you saying that it's not implemented, it's not robust enough for your comfort?
No, it's really not. So if I were to go, I visited Estonia last fall. And Estonia in 2007 was taken down by a cyber threat, took to their knees, and they changed their entire perspective as a country on what the cyber threat means to them in their survival as a country. And so they put coding in elementary schools because they thought the threat was significant enough. I'm not sure if we've gotten to a point where we believe that something we can do as a nation would strengthen our ability to protect ourselves from this new threat. It's a new threat. And so the specifics would be, I may be a bit paranoid, but when I see an airline company's reservation system go down, I don't immediately think that it's just a problem part. I think, is that an actor potentially probing? If I see a rail switch not work, I also want to make sure that it's not a cyber problem. And it could be just mechanical. But we've all got to think about how do we protect ourselves ahead of the investigation after a problem happens.
So what I get from your response is that we certainly are not prepared as a nation to counter effectively all of the different ways that we can, our infrastructure and particularly our infrastructure can be vulnerable to cyber attacks. And, you know, this is why we have a cyber command, and there's a lot of emphasis in this committee as well as other committees on our cyber vulnerabilities, and I can see where we need more. And what I'd like to see is more of a whole of government kind of an approach to what we can do with cyber, regarding the cyber issue, and I don't think we have that. In your testimony, you stated that the Maritime Security Program is provides an intermodal logistic capability outside of the DoD portfolio that would be too expensive to replicate. And so can you describe the challenges to the Transcom mission if you did not have this program?
So the Maritime Security Program provides about 60 U.S. flagged ships with U.S. flagged mariners, U.S. mariners on board to do our needs and to potentially take this nation to war. Without that stipend paid to those companies, I believe that many of them might cease to exist as U.S. flagged companies. And that has been something we've been doing for a number of years to assure that access to that capability and capacity.
Well, you also indicate that the number of U.S. flagged ships are also decreasing, have decreased over time, and that you also have concerns about whether we have a labor pool of U.S. Personnel that can staff these ships. So, you know, this is a double-edged problem, and what are we doing to counter these problems?
Similar to the cybercom issue that you brought up. So U.S. Cyber Command can't defend the entire nation, doesn't have the authority to do so. I personally can't change all the things that need to probably be changed. I'm not sure where the young men and women who grew up in my day wanted to be mariners and truckers and pilots are, because we're seeing a decline in a lot of those. And I'm not sure what all the forces that are in play to have 1,288 ships flying the U.S. flag in 1950 dwindled down to 88 ships today. I'm not sure all the forces, but the MSP program allows 60 of them to keep their U.S. flag and to stay with us.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask one follow-up question, then. Is it your preference that you have access to U.S. flag, U.S. crewed ships, as opposed to, at some point, having to resort to internationally owned ships?
It's not a decision that I made. It's a decision the country made that we will move our U.S. forces on U.S. flagged and U.S. built ships, U.S. flagged ships. If the nation wants to change that, that's a debate the nation can have, but I right now will comply with what I'm told to do.
Well, as a strong supporter of the Jones Act, that's kind of where we should be, I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Rono. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, good morning. Thank you for being before the committee. In your last War Games exercise, what vulnerabilities were exposed that we should think about addressing, and what order would you address those exposures?
It was a grand flash of the obvious after we did it.
Yes.
The importance of doing it was it identified several areas that we need to focus on internal to U.S. Transportation Command, and I would say possibly across the nation, because our problems are actually not just our problems, they're actually national problems. The first and foremost is cyber. Cyber is, I believe, the challenge of our time. It is the one that will define this period of time in our history more than just about any other challenge, and it brings potentially the fight that we would have on other people's shores, it brings it here. The other for us is attrition. The fact that logistics capabilities and mobility capabilities have not been counted on to attrit in a fight is something that we can't probably have as a reality going forward. Mobilization. Just about every option I give to the nation today requires me to mobilize a reserve and guard. I don't think we formulated them, resourced them to be the operational force that they have become over the last 3 decades. That's just a few of those things, Senator.
Let's take a little more time on the cyber exposure. I understand that 90% of your command's mission takes place over unclassified communication networks, and I think you said in your written statement, establishing secure IT infrastructure for commercial industry must be a priority. Can you walk me through the complex exposures and vulnerabilities that you have when 90% of it happens in the commercial environment?
Senator, what I have been learning over time is there are many companies out there who understand how vulnerable they are in the cyberspace. Because I bridge the gap between the authorities that are invested in U.S. Cyber Command and the authorities inherent in the Department of Homeland Security to protect, respectively, the .com and MIL different domains, because I live in that space, we've had a series of cyber roundtables as a result of our contested environment war game, where we invite in academics, commercial industry, and some hackers to help us understand the problem better. In one of those roundtables, in one of the panels, are a series of security officers in corporate America said that they cannot get in to see the board, or can they get in to see the CEO to talk about the problem. That is not every company, but it's at least a few that don't understand the severity of the problem. And even if they understand it intellectually, they may not have all the tools required to fully understand the sophistication of today's threat.
On the attrition aspect, so there is a likelihood that during transportation you lose something. Is that pretty simple?
I think that's pretty simply stated and quite true.
On the mobilization, can you expound upon that for a minute?
Absolutely. So when I was a youngster 150 years ago, coming in to fly airplanes for the very first time, the majority, and I'll use one example, and it can apply to all of the logistics force. The KC-135 was heavily invested in the active duty. Strategic Air Command existed, and so 80% of those airplanes were in active duty units. Transition to today, and about 60 to 65% of that is now in the Guard or Reserve. It has nothing to do about my trust and confidence in their ability to do the mission. It has everything to do with how available they are. And so With all of that shift in the Guard and Reserve, a high-end fight says we must mobilize. If our history says that we would immediately decide to go to war, immediately decide to mobilize, that's fine. If history shows that we'll live in this space between peace and war for a period of time, I'm worried that I will have access to those folks that I need when I need them.
Chances are pretty high we're going to live in that purgatory for a lot longer than we're comfortable. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, good to see you, and thanks for all you're doing. I just want to ask you just off the top, your command does so much, and it's so critical to the warfighter, to any kind of military operation. I think it's unsung in many ways, how much work you do and how we can't function as a U.S. military without you operating effectively, efficiently. What's the top issue that keeps you up at night right now, General, and the biggest challenge?
Well, first, let me thank you for acknowledging the great men and women who live in the cornfields of Illinois, who are watching you right now in watch parties all across the command.
They do a great job, and I think they're unsung in many.
And then you just pump me up because all of my self-esteem is derived from how good they are, because I don't actually do much anymore. Our number one threat, Senator, is cyber and how well we were able to protect ourselves and protect my fourth component, which is commercial industry in the cyber domain.
And so you have some control over the cyber domain as it relates to the military, but it's much less control in the commercial realm. Isn't that correct?
I have no personal control in the cyber domain in the military. U.S. Cyber Command does, and they do an effective job of that. I have zero control except through contracting mechanisms with the commercial industry.
I want to ask a question relating to the great state of Alaska. You know, with the National Defense Strategy out, which I strongly support, the kind of shift in focus, I think most senators do, by the way, to kind of a great power competition and some of our national security challenges, whether it's Russia, North Korea, China. My state actually happens to be close to all of those countries, and as you know, we are the hub of air combat power for the Asia Pacific and the Arctic, with soon to have over 100 fifth-generation fighters based in Alaska, and all the C-17s and C-130s and F-16s and a whole host of important military assets, including expeditionary forces that can get to North Korea or the Korean Peninsula or anywhere else in a moment's notice. I know that you and I've talked to the Secretary of the Air Force and General Goldfein a lot about this, are looking soon at the Oconus decision with regard to KC-46s and the tanker refueling deployments. I've been trying to make the case that it makes a lot of strategic sense, not just because of the assets that are in there, but every airplane that flies over the Asia Pacific from the lower 48 actually flies over Alaska. Can you give us a sense of where we are on the Oconus KC-46 deployments, and give me assurances that Alaska's strategic location, as you know, Billy Mitchell, the father of the Air Force, called it the most strategic place in the world, is in strong consideration for those Oconus deployments?
I will acknowledge that Alaska is strategically important. Although I wear this wonderful blue uniform and I'm an airman and have been a proud airman for 35, nearly 36 years, I'm not currently in the Air Force right now. So I cannot talk to you about the choices the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief Staff of the Air Force will make about the actual basing of those assets. The thing I would like to highlight, though, is as the combatant commander who has combatant command authority over those assets in a warfight, our ability to set, balance, and use the globe entirely, is going to be important.
Thank you. One final question, General, and I do want to, I'm sorry I missed my colleague Senator Scott's question, but I think it relates to that. But on the integration of reserves and Guard and active forces with regard to your command How important is that, and how important is it that we continue to make sure that our reserve and guard components are fully trained, fully funded, fully resourced to make sure that when called upon, they can do the mission that's so important to your command?
My command would cease to exist and operate the way it does today without the reserve component. A good portion of my force is in the reserve component across all the services. In my Army component, I'm not sure of the percentage, but the plurality is in the reserve component. The air component, the majority is in the reserve component. And so I am very interested in both their readiness and training and resourcing. And it is not the way it should be based on how often we'll use them and how much we'll be able to rely on them.
And do continuing resolutions help or hurt the readiness of of those forces?
CRs are probably the most disastrous thing that we can have happen to a military force that's trying to, one, recapitalize and maintain a level of readiness to fight today's high-end fight.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Welcome and thank you for your service. As you know, the United States has continued to reassure our partners in Europe, our NATO allies, of America's dedication to that region in the face of Russia's continuing belligerent and aggressive actions. Transcom continues to support the services of our presence in Europe, including aircraft, tanks, personnel, so that we do joint exercises and we demonstrate a joint resolve. I would like to know what capabilities Russia has to interfere with our logistics pipeline in Europe, and should we be more concerned about the physical obstructions and manipulation that Russia can present, the potential destruction of our pipeline, including the cyber realm, but in other domains as well?
Senator, because our contested environment war game allowed us to see more clearly the problem set and how contested the world is, we see access as being one of those areas in the physical domain. If we look around the globe, in particular the European continent, we're going to have to be able to use as many ports of entry, as many lines of communication as possible if we were to find ourselves in a potential fight in that theater. All of those are not as assured as they once were, say, 20, 30 years ago. So Russia has levers of influence in that domain that we probably haven't considered for a number of decades.
As you know, and I think you made reference to it, compared to the 300,000 troops in the Cold War, we have about 64,000 now. They could be used in crisis. The European Union is also seeking to build European defense capabilities. Do you think that Europe is contributing or doing enough?
There are several ways to go down this path, and I'm going to choose one. One of these, I have great faith and confidence that one of the reasons the America's as respected as we are around the globe is our partnerships and allies. The things that we can do today with partners and allies is something that some other great powers in the world just don't have. And the fact that we have an alliance like NATO, the fact that we have partners that are willing to be with us and contribute what they can when they can is important. Many of them can contribute more, and I believe the administration is trying very hard to get them to that level of contribution. But I'll tell you, there's some potential adversaries out there that do not have any partners and allies, and I'd go to war with us anytime.
You'd go to war with our allies?
With our allies anytime.
And do you think they can and should do more?
I believe that every country ought to do as much as they can. I think sometimes our asks aren't as specific as they need to be in today's environment. For example, Estonia is some of the greatest cyber experts on the planet. Maybe that's their contribution. Maybe they don't have exquisite planes or exquisite ships, but they have the cyber capability, so contribute where you can.
And some of their contributions are in kind,
Right.
not necessarily monetary.
Correct.
So they're more difficult to measure,
Your call.
but they still are material.
They are. However, there are some countries that can provide monetary aid at a higher level than they are, and they ought to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, good morning. I have the privilege of, along with Senator Rounds, of heading the Cyber Subcommittee. He is our chairman. And needless to say, I think that we are very vulnerable in cyber. What authorities do you need to help the private sector improve their cyber defenses before we end up having a major disruption?
Senator, I do agree with you that cyber is one of the challenges of our time, probably the greatest challenge of this generation. And in that regard, we need a national cyber standard. We need to decide where the low watermark is for the country and get at least everybody to that direction. I believe the other help we need is to understand this generation, as they grow up as high-end users of cyber, understand the high-end vulnerabilities of cyber. We taught them at one point in their lives to cough into their sleeve and to wash their hands when they're sick, but we haven't taught them the dangers that face them in the cyber realm.
What's it going to take? Is it going to take a major cyber attack and therefore shutdown of American industry for the private sector to really realize what's happening?
Senator, I hope not. I still believe in America, and I still believe in America's ingenuity, and I still believe that we'll eventually get it right. However, our history shows that getting our attention sometimes is difficult and painful. And sometimes it takes an economic crisis, or sometimes it takes a financial ruin for some companies to get kind of religion on this one.
Over in the Commerce Committee, General, we're hopefully going to be able to pass an FAA bill. And since your transportation command certainly involves a lot of the use of the airspace, I think we've pretty well put to rest the fact that there was an effort by the airlines to want to privatize air traffic control. I think that's pretty much over and done with. Do you want to do any comment about that?
No, Senator.
Well, just so the record is complete, I will say that for several years now, up until just recently, it was the position of the Department of Defense, as articulated by the Secretary of Defense's office, that since they had about 20% of the airspace, they did not want privatize air traffic control. So I'll just leave it at that. The KC-135s are really doing a workhorse job for you, aren't they, General?
They are. They have been for 60-plus years, Senator.
But now the delays on the KC-46 are putting additional pressure on the 135s, aren't they?
There are actually a number of factors working on those things besides age. I'd love to be as young as some of them, but I'm not. The other maintenance capability and the fact that the parts aren't as readily available as possible, but those great young men and women, particularly the ones who maintain them, are doing a great job.
Well, has this impacted your readiness?
It has. And a series of continuing resolutions don't help the fact that the Air Force has had to make some tough decisions on what they can fund and what they can't fund, when they can fund those things, and it has taken a slight dip in readiness in the KC-135 fleet.
When is it going to become apparent that it's a significant issue that's going to have to be confronted by the Air Force?
I believe the Air Force understands the nature of the problem. They've also had a problem with being able to fund all the things that they find that they need to fund, and to be able to do it on a regular, recurring basis. I'm really concerned. I'm thankful for the budgets we have. I'm hoping that they continue at least to be on a regularly scheduled period of time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, welcome. Thank you for being here. In your testimony today, you explained that in today's operational environment, mobility forces may be required to transport and sustain U.S. and allied forces while under persistent multi-domain attack, including deception and data manipulation in cyberspace. In your opinion, which Transcom assets are most vulnerable in this contested environment?
This may surprise you a little bit. When I talk about Transcom assets, the ones most vulnerable, the ones I don't own, and that's commercial industry. We have a strong cyber defense standard inside the Department of Defense, but outside the Department of Defense, I'm not as sure it reaches all of American citizens and all of American industry the way it ought to.
And if those assets are compromised, how would that impact your ability to perform the task given to you?
It would be disastrous because 90% of our ability to take troops to war is in the commercial industry, 40% of the cargo capabilities in the commercial industry. It would be disastrous.
So from your perspective, are there aspects in your budget that are focused on dealing with the vulnerability on the commercial side?
Not at all, Senator.
Let's shift. In your testimony, you also state that volatile geopolitics, shifting demographics, and emerging technology have all changed the character of war and the way we fight. And they're changing where wars are fought and who's fighting them. These new dynamics have a potential to bring a dramatic shift from the wars in the Middle East that have shaped much of the current forces' expertise and experience. How have you begun to shape the training and the mindset of Transcom forces to prepare them for a war fought under these new conditions?
Senator, we have not been perfect to date, but what we're perfectly good at is understanding where our problems are now. And so if our contested environment war game that we had 2 years ago, followed up with one last year, has illuminated a number of the problem areas that we'll have, so that we have problem statements and solutions that we're trying to go after in each of them. I don't control all the areas because in my components that do the business of this nation, projecting power to go to war, a good portion of it is outside of my control. So we're using contracting mechanisms to bring people up to a certain standard in some of those areas, and then we're continually having war games and exercises where we invite not just the services, but commercial industry and academia to participate.
Now, you just mentioned the contested environment war games. How are you measuring success during these training events?
Unfortunately, Senator, we're in its infancy, and so success right now is bringing everybody's knowledge level up. 2.5 years ago, we didn't have a cyber standard in our contracts. We have one now. That's a direct result of that level of learning and understanding. If you were to come to my headquarters, and the invitation is out there now, if you were to come to our headquarters, you'd see a level of discussion and dialogue and language being used that is vastly different from any other combatant command. I'm a little bit parochial and proud, but I would say that's to be true.
I understand. So have y'all been able to take any lessons learned that have been operationalized as a result of the war games?
We have. Most of it has been through what we've included in our exercises. So all of our exercises now assume some level of cyber degradation, every last one of them. It may be just at the tabletop level, but it's in every exercise. we bake attrition into every one of our exercises and everything we discuss. And then we have, as I said, the contracts all have cyber standards in them.
You know, one area that's been a persistent concern for me has been our vulnerability in space. And we're seeing more and more of our near-peer competitors targeting space assets. To what extent in war games or exercises are y'all exercising in a space-down environment with no satellite support or contact whatsoever?
I can't say that we do it in every exercise, but as the cyber degradation also has a level of space because this the precision navigation and timing aspect,
right.
That loss is catastrophic. So we're trying to bake more and more in that in every time we have an exercise.
Very good. Thank you, General.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator King, did you have a following question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was struck by your testimony a few minutes ago that we went from, I think you said, 1,288 U.S. flagships in 1950 to 80 today. Is that the correct number? It seems to me that really underlines the importance of the MSP program. I never thought of it that way before, but it's kind of insurance policy. Should we be investing more heavily in that program in order to be sure that 80 doesn't become 20?
Exactly.
Right now, I love the way you stated that. It is an insurance policy, and I think it's a very cheap insurance policy. If we were to have those 60 ships in our own yards, I will tell you it costs you a lot more than $300 million. And that's all it costs us right now. It's an effective policy. In our next set of mobility capability study, we will look at how much maritime capacity do we need, and is it sufficient? And I'll be able to come back to you with that answer.
I hope you will, because I'd hate to lowball this and end up with a lack of capacity again in a crisis and say, gee, why didn't we spend relatively small amount compared with trying to build that fleet ourselves in-house. So I hope you will track that, and perhaps in your next in your presentation for next year's budget that's a factor.
That study is due in September of this year to the Senate.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator King, and thank you very much, General McDew. Just excellent. We're commenting how excellent your answers have been during this hearing, and we appreciate that very much. We're adjourned.
Thank you.